Bruce Bodaken is Chairman, President, and CEO of Blue Shield of California, which is a 3.3 million member not-for-profit health plan that serves commercial, individual, and government markets in California. Mr. Bodaken is a native of Iowa. He should feel comfortable here in Davis. Davis is often described as a Midwestern city located in California. Mr. Bodaken doesn't fit the typical profile of a health plan CEO. He earned a master's level degree and taught philosophy at the college level before embarking on a career in healthcare. During his 5-year tenure as CEO, Blue Shield has been the fastest growing health plan in California. Memberships more than doubled, and company revenues have risen from $3 billion to $7.5 billion. That's really a phenomenal record. In the past 3 years, the company's won vigorous competitions for 2 large government contracts covering more than 400,000 state employees in CalPERS and 500,000 members of U.S. military families enrolled in the TRICARE program. He's passionate about his company's not-for-profit mission. Mr. Bodaken is the first health plan CEO to offer a specific proposal to cover all Californians. It's really quite a phenomenal attempt on his part. His provocative plan for universal coverage based on universal responsibility has earned praise from major news organizations throughout the country. And during his tenure, he has transformed Blue Shield of California Foundation into one of the state's largest health care grant makers, with nearly 30 million donations in 2005, mostly supporting programs to help the uninsured, combat domestic violence, and expand the use of effective healthcare technology. Mr. Bodaken has recently co-authored the book, The Managerial Moment of Truth, which is the title of his presentation today. And you can see a mock-up of it over there. I want you to please join me in welcoming Bruce Bodaken.
Well, what a nice presentation. Turn this on. I guess, green is better than red. Well, first I want to congratulate the school. Anything that lasts 25 years is well worth celebrating, and you all are important in so many ways, but I will tell you that the reason I'm standing up here is the fact that we've had the great privilege of having some of the students work with Blue Shield on summer internships, and we hope many of you will at least consider Blue Shield as at least one of the places you might make your career. We've had great interaction, and I echo the comments made about the quality of the students. And I take it that means that there must be some pretty darn good faculty here. I want to thank my posse from Blue Shield for showing up. They really were not required to do it, but I did take your names down. So I won't forget. And again, I want to congratulate Dr. Robert Lorber for his award. It sounds like he and I were talking earlier about why I wrote the book, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But one of the things that I've found is that I'm a much better CEO than I am in understanding the publishing world. So I'll get some tips from him later. I'm going to start. Actually, I jumped over the first slide because Nicole did such a good job of talking about Blue Shield. And I should point out one other thing, that sitting at our table today, that 400,000 member state employee account, one of our little accounts, Jarville Grievous here, and it was kind to come. They have put their faith in Blue Shield for the last 3 years. We just renewed our partnership, and what we enjoy about it is 400,000 members, $1.5 billion in revenue, and as importantly, a consideration of our common policy views that some way, someday, we're going to make sure that everybody in California has at least basic health care benefits. So, Jarvia, thanks for being here. So, why we wrote the book? Well, as I said to Robert at the table, the reality is I've got a day job. I didn't, if I was counting on this for income, I missed that boat, trust me. So someday I'll make up the advance. The reality is that absent Robert Fritz, I probably wouldn't have. Robert and I had worked together since I became CEO in 2000. He works on strategy, works on leadership, he works in a variety of areas. And as he came out and worked with us in developing what we call the leadership principles and behaviors, and that's another lecture, another course, another time, but they're really the cornerstone for great execution in our company. We think they obviously translate into great execution, these principles in other companies, but they really have been the foundation since we started there to differentiate what we had been doing as a company, which was being a very good and strong company, but to take us to that next level, and that's not over for any company. We're always in process. There's lots more for us to do, and we're certainly engaged in that. But we had those leadership principles and behaviors, and they were things like, as you will see later, setting unreasonable goals. Talk a little bit about that word in a moment. Being obsessed with excellence. Knowing your people's people, really getting into the trenches and understanding not only the business aspects of what's going on, but actually the nature and planning around development of people within your organization. So the question for us is how to move from those principles into real practical ways to in fact change the nature of not just behaviors, but the quality of performance of the organization. And with Robert, as we started down that path, he can take full credit for actually coining the term as well as the art of the managerial moment of truth. I asked him to come in and help us with this, and he used this as one technique, along with several others that we are using, to try to get at how do we take principles from a piece of paper to actually change the quality of performance, experience, and service, and cost effectiveness to our customers. And that's really what we were doing. Now, in that process, what we came to find out was that the experience at Blue Shield perhaps wasn't quite so different as at the experience in other companies. And this is still true. For those of you at Blue Shield, you certainly agree with me. We have great people. And these people are committed. They're committed to the mission. They're committed to the business. They're good at what they do. But at the same time, one of the things that often happened, and still happens to some extent, is the real conversations didn't happen in the room. The real conversations in terms of how we pushed the company forward, the things that needed to be put on the table to make sure that we were doing everything we could, people were not always comfortable. Not so much confronting one another, because that wasn't necessary, but sometimes weren't even comfortable being direct with one another. And it was out of that experience that Robert said, that we've got to figure out a way for this to not be personal, but still that people use their talents, their experiences to be able to talk to one another in a way that really changes the nature of the performance curve. And that's indeed what the Managerial Moment of Truth is all about. In that same process, it was surprising to us, as I hope it will be a little bit intriguing and surprising to you, in some respects how rare truth is in the kinds of conversations we have with one another, not just in regard to our business life or our work life or our student life, but with our families and in other kinds of associations. One of the best examples for those of us who are parents is trying to have a direct conversation with your son, your daughter, particularly in the teen years. My son's 16, my older son's 19, and he was actually a little easier to have a direct conversation with. My son, who's 16, is very good at, when we start down a path, like, why did you get caught speeding? When we start down that path, his response is, well, I've seen you speed. which of course wasn't a response to the question, but for him it fills the void, creates what he considers to be a perfectly rational justification for what he's done, and that's that. Now, if you think about other kinds of experiences you may have in your work life, your student life, and in certainly kind of leadership life that we have at Blue Shield or any other company, conversations much like that happen. Often we start in a relatively direct way, and the conversation gets turned, and I'll talk more about how that happens and what we think you can do to try to turn it really back into where it can be more positive and successful. But as you look around, and I think as you think about this, hopefully at the end of the presentation, I hope you'll walk out and start listening for how many times that happens, not only at your dinner table, not back where you work, but almost everywhere in life. We're not a culture that does a good job of speaking directly and maintaining that level of directness for any period of time, and we'll talk about why that is. So, what's our overall desired outcome? We believe, and we've shown at least, and I would say statistically, to some extent at Blue Shield, we can show the statistics and quote the statistics that were quoted about the performance of the company. That's clear. To show the actual causal relationship between the managerial moment of truth and those kind of results is much, much harder. But we clearly are doing a much better job of having the critical conversations in the room now, and I personally believe that's having a big impact on both our leadership and performance in the organization. But what we believed was it was about getting the most potential from our folks, but it was also about, again, this notion of how could we dramatically change the performance curve of the organization, and for those of us who are, like all of us, that are very concerned about efficiency, we could do it at little or no cost. This is free if we're willing to do it. Now, it's not easy, but it is free. This is simply changing the way we talk to one another in order to deal with not just performance issues, which sounds negative, but actually overperformance as well. So there are actually what we call corrective managerial moments of truth as well as positive moments of truth, and both need to be used systematically, we think, to have the most impact. So we think performance capacity is ready to be untapped in most organizations. We probably, we're guessing that at least in our organization, our managers spend about 40% of their time doing things over, sending things back, redoing it themselves. The kinds of things that we talk about in process management, rework. And rework at a management level is every bit as expensive. In fact, it's more expensive. And we form bad habits around rework. So if it comes across my desk and it's not up to standard, it may be easier for me to change it rather than send it back to you. And of course, once I had done that, I've set a process in motion that the next time it comes across my desk, I'll do the same thing, which is costing me time. It's certainly not suggesting to anyone else that's on that audit trail of where that piece of paper came from that they're required to put quality work into the next into the supply chain, so when it ends up on my desk or anybody else's desk, it's the kind of work we can be proud of and it doesn't require rework. So the quote, managers don't make things, they make performance. I mean, if we think about the role of management, whether you're making widgets or healthcare or anything else, this is the key to leadership. It's to not only just having the right people, but it's having the right people do the best possible job they can do. They often talked about Michael Jordan coming on the court and making the whole team better. And there's something about that. Great leaders make the whole team better by virtue of their being part of the mix. They bring the whole team up to an average that alone they wouldn't be able to make it. And again, we hope that this is in part something that we've been able to match in the book. So we wrote the book primarily because we wanted to do something inside of Blue Shield. We thought it was common across as we looked at other organizations. And we continue to believe that this has much application, frankly, again, in a variety of different places. This notion of setting unreasonable goals. This, incidentally, is, everyone's read Good to Great and the other Jim Collins books. This is not that different if we think about it in terms of the kinds of things Jim says. We've talked a fair amount about what he's been trying to do and what we've been trying to do. Unreasonable, yes. Impossible, no. but setting goals at an aspirational level, so much at an aspirational level that you don't know how you're going to achieve them. The classic example of that, of course, is John Kennedy saying we'll be on the moon in 10 years. And, NASA had no idea how in the world they could possibly do that, and yet they did. Now, those kinds of aspirational goals, in my view, are part and parcel of what great organizations achieve. Not all the time, but much more often than they otherwise would if they didn't set what we call unreasonable goals. There are people at Blue Shield that are very uncomfortable with the word unreasonable. If it's unreasonable, why should we be going after it? And I said, when unreasonable stops to bother you, we'll take it out. I mean, the whole point here is we're setting goals that by their very nature are going to be difficult to achieve, not impossible to achieve, and it'll take great creativity on the part of our leaders and managers and the other 4,000 employees in the organization to make it happen. But that's the kind of organization we want to be and intend to be. The truth. Why is the truth important? Well, again, because we often don't get to it in our conversations. Not the hard truth. The importance of the managerial moment of truth is when you start to look at a situation, you want to know the truth about us. And us, in this case, I'll use Blue Shield as the example, is what are our skills? What are our gaps? How much money do we have in the bank? What do our customers think of us? All those kinds of things is about us. But we certainly need to know also what about them. And them are, again, not just customers, but the regulatory environment, our competitors, those kinds of things that are going to influence our ability to be successful in the market. Really knowing the truth about that. Not thinking we know, but having, whether it's information, reporting, or in fact experience that we know to be true. And then with setting unreasonable goals, knowing the truth, our view is that's where planning, executing, and learning becomes a constant loop. So we put the plan in place. We execute against it in the context of the leadership principles and behaviors, and we learn from it. And almost always, we will learn that we didn't anticipate every contingency, that there's something we could have done differently or better or more cost effectively. And this cycle of correction is the ones that again, if I were to look at good organizations to great organizations, it's that self-learning that great organizations do day in and day out. So hopefully they don't make the same mistake twice. They certainly don't make it 3 times. Whereas good organizations tend to find themselves, again, making sometimes that mistake 1, 2, and 3 times, sometimes never correcting it. It's a fundamental difference in the patterns that you will see in good to great organizations. So a word about truth. Small t. I do love philosophy, still actually read as much of it as I can from time to time, and I love teaching it. But there's nothing mysterious or abstract about the notion of truth in the managerial moment of truth. The notion of truth in the managerial moment of truth is merely truth as a verb. That is, it's you and I talking about what we see and coming to some consensus about what we see, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, but it sounds like that should be an easy thing to do. It often is not. But one of the things that we'll find in that mutual exploration is that we'll start to understand why our assumptions sometimes conflict, and sometimes when I've asked you to put the report, or do something with the report, I haven't been clear. Sometimes I've been clear and you haven't performed. Those are the kinds of things that, as we look at reality, we're talking about. So there's nothing, this is not a Platonic form, notion of truth. This is simply good old-fashioned trying to understand together what we see together. And it's not about our opinions. It's not that kind of relativistic concept that, well, you see it this way and I see it that way. Frankly, if you see it this way and I see it that way, we're never going to get on the same wavelength in terms of improving the standard of performance within an organization. The whole notion is, how do we align our views of reality? They can certainly be different. How do we align our views of reality so that when we walk out of the room and decide we're going to perform down a singular path, we know, I know what I'm doing, you know what you're doing, and we know how we're going to get it done. So it isn't simply my opinion. It's coming to some kind of agreement. And it is, in our view, the fundamental foundation for anything that lasts in an organization. We all know that cultures are often powered by examples, to some degree myth, to some degree legend. And those are important in terms of trying to create a culture that's positive and has sustainability. But there is nothing like sustaining a culture than the truth. Than people speaking the truth, and as importantly, knowing the truth about what they can do, what the business can do, and how they can improve it. It really is the foundation of learning that lasts. So why do we have trouble telling each other the truth? And if we were to, we teach this in a day-long session, Robert and I, we did with managers, and it was a great session. But everyone understands this, and the biggest reason, of course, is emotional conflict. I don't want to have let's all be happy. We don't. I have no desire to get in your face, and you don't have any desire to get in mine. And even if I don't like you, I just soon talk behind your back rather than in front of you. And whatever those things are. For the most part, human beings are conflict averse. Now, there are a few of us that love to jump into conflict and actually stir things up. But most of us don't like that. Most of us don't. Most of us actually really do want to get along. And that's a good thing. But because that's a natural human tendency, one of the things we often do is overlook the truth. We don't drive for the truth. And it does create issues for us when we try to build a program of success built on the truth. Robert talks about speculation, and I call it spin is in. He uses the example of when you look at the talk show, not the news, so-called news talk shows, and turn on the TV about 5 or 6. Hopefully you'll see a few of our new brand commercials, which just started yesterday. Turn on the TV at 5 or 6, and the so-called hard news is over, and now all the pundits come on. And they start describing and analyzing the day's events in light of their perspective, their biases. They talk to all kinds of people about their point of view. But most of that, and you can watch a program for an hour, for the most part, most of that is speculation. There's very little fact. The next time you watch it, and I don't care if it's Fox News or CNN or NBC, there's very little fact. It's mostly people's opinions, not based on fact, but based on what they believe. Nothing wrong with that, but of course the assumption here is if I'm watching news, this is fact. So we have started to confuse facts and speculation. And it's no different in the context of trying to lead organizations. It is very easy for, just like for my 16-year-old, to change the subject, if you will, in describing what had occurred in terms of his being stopped. The good news is he's going to lose his license. He was going so fast. So, if you were worried about that, nothing like getting out of some insurance bills for the short period. So, so spin is in, and we often speculate. It's another reason. Past experience. Why don't we tell the truth to each other in a business context when I'm trying to improve your behavior? Because I've tried it and it hasn't worked. I had a conversation with you last Friday. We talked about, the work wasn't on time. Here's some places that where clearly the quality wasn't up to standard. I've done that 3 times with this same individual. I'm done. He or she just doesn't get it. I'd rather correct it myself. And when that starts to happen, you really only have 2 choices. You can either correct it yourself. 3 choices. You can either correct it yourself, and you can expect that you'll be correcting a lot, because that message will be sent loud and clear. The second might come up is that you may not have to correct it yourself, but you will create a whole process in which you will set up inequities in transitioning your work. Any management workforce, certainly any leadership workforce, is a bell-shaped curve. You really have superstars at this 20%. You've got people that are really struggling. But in the middle are most of us. So what happens in cultures in which where we don't tell the truth and where we're not willing to confront, when we're not willing to talk to each other about non-performance or for that matter overperformance, what happens is, and especially when we're under the gun, who do we give it to? We give it to the go-to people. We give it to the people we know are going to deliver. They're going to deliver on time. They're going to deliver quality. So we take 60% of the work and we give it to 20% of the leadership. And what happens then? Because they don't get paid a heck of a lot more than the rest of the group. They get burnt out. They get burnt out. And they look around and go, I don't get this. I'm busting my rear end, and John's over here, he's leaving at 5 every night, seems to be happy. And why is it that I love doing what I'm doing, but this is, so this compensating strategy that comes from saying, I give up, is powerful. And again, it happens in every organization. It particularly happens, if I've got a board presentation, right? It's got to be right. And I'm more likely to give that to people that are already busy, probably too busy, than I am to someone as a trial experience as to whether or not they're going to deliver. But if we don't ever get the opportunity for them to deliver, then we shouldn't be surprised that they don't. The actual moment of truth is very simple. It's simply, I was expecting something that wasn't delivered. And it can be a deadline, it can be it can be anything. So there is a difference in my expectation, our expectation, between what we expected and what was delivered. And that, again, can be, you make that as simple as you want. But of course, what's critical in the managerial moment of truth is the second line. And this is where telling the truth becomes difficult. Is what do I do at that very moment? At the very moment that I realize that piece of work is different than what I expected, or that piece of work is superior to what I expected, either one, that's the moment of truth. That's the managerial moment of truth. And either I will lead, or I will overlook the difference. If I overlook the difference and it's positive, I have not accelerated the opportunity for the organization to see great work by virtue of example and celebration. But of course, more often where it occurs in organizations is where it's not up to standard, and again, I overlook it. And I'm reinforcing the very thing that worries our ability to be a great organization, and is importantly for managers to develop the potential that they need to develop. So let's talk about what we created then. Was our situation was we aren't telling each other the truth, at least not enough. And that's because of things that are, in some respects, natural, social, human tendencies. It is absolutely critical for great organizations to be able to tell each other the truth so we can change our behavior. So how do we do that? And it really was these relatively simple steps that we came to and saying, how do you go about systematically changing that so it's not personal, that it's about learning, and it's about changing the learning and performance curve? And these are the 4 steps. Acknowledge the truth, figure it out. And what we say in the first step is get to yes. All of you fly probably once in a while, and if you sit in the exit row, and you did this 5 years ago, they would say you're sitting in the exit row, and when we go down, be sure that you know how to use that hatch and get us out of here. And then they walk by. What do they do now? They come up to the row. They say, are you willing to save us when we go down? And you can nod your head, and they need to hear yes. They won't leave until they hear yes. It's got to be an affirmative yes. I'm ready to do that. Even though, of course, none of us are ready to do that. We all say yes because we like that extra legroom. But they require a yes. That's what you need here. Is when you start to explore reality, that shared vision of reality with someone, and they say it's green and you say it's blue, and you say, well, why do you think it's green? Because it looks blue to me. Let me tell you why I think it's blue. Okay, now tell me why you think it's green. Oh, okay, all right, now I'm starting to understand. And pretty soon you'll find yourself, and then the moment that occurs, where you finally say, okay, I think we have agreement, you restate and say, is it in fact blue? And as simple as that is, once we get to blue, which we sometimes do in our regular conversations, we don't state it. And we think, he agreed with me, she agreed with me, it's blue. I know this doesn't happen to any of your relationships personally, right? In a previous relationship that I had, I don't know about for you, I was constantly, at least being accused and probably true, I was coming to agreement without a conversation, right? And I couldn't understand how we could possibly be disagreeing because, no, we had the conversation, we said it was blue, and certainly you've been in those situations. What you need is, it's blue, right? And the other person says, yeah, it's blue. Okay, we're done with step one. Now that can take anywhere from about 10 seconds to an hour and a half in our experience. It just depends on what it is. But it is so important to get through that because now you've got a basis of truth to work from. You've got a foundation on which learning will last. Secondly, analyze how it got to be that way. This one is also very tricky because we call it the blow by blow. Sometimes what we like to do is say, you know, this wasn't up to standard, right? Right. So you're going to improve it? Right. Okay, great. 3 bags full, they walk out of the office, and the next day, by golly, they've got something on your desk, and it looks exactly like the other thing. And you go back to them and say, what, you know, we met yesterday, I said this wasn't up to the standard, you said I know that, and I'll fix it, and it's the same thing. Well, why is it the same thing? Because we didn't talk about how it got to be that way. What steps did you go through that led you to think that this was a quality piece of work? You wouldn't send me a piece of work that you didn't think was quality. So let's go through the step, blow by blow. And you will be surprised in that process again, restating. Sometimes that will take you a long time, but once you do it a few times with someone, you can get to it very quickly. Create an action plan. All this is, what would I have done differently? Now, what I know now about the reality and how the steps that I followed failed to produce the result that I wanted, how would I do it differently next time? And finally, what I think is actually very simple but also very powerful, and this is Robert's contribution, not mine. For managers, it is not unusual. Email, of course, is the easiest way and probably the way we communicate most in most organizations these days rather than face-to-face. But after we've had a conversation face-to-face like that or even over the telephone, what often happens is the manager sends an email. If they do anything at all and document the conversation, they send the email to the person saying, here's what we've agreed to. Now, we require it the other way around. What we say is in the fourth step, what we need is for the person you've had the discussion with is to send you an email and document what they heard, what they're going to do, and when they're going to do it. And in that immediate moment, you know if you have agreement. And what often you'll see is that even though you think you've been very clear that you guys have agreed, is that you've got one more step to take because in that documentation it will be different. What is a managerial moment of truth? It's mentorship. It's learning at its core. It is a collective inquiry, and it is with this notion of what am I trying to drive to? So I start with the outcome, I move back to try to examine current reality, and then I fill the gap. So I've got to have an outcome in mind, whether it's ensuring 7 million Californians, lowering the price of our individual products, whatever it is. That's the outcome. You know, well, are our products affordable? What are we going to do about that? How do we fill the gap? So having that outcome in mind and continuing to plan, execute, and learn until you get to the outcome. What it is not, this is not a reprimand. This is co-exploration of how we got here. Now, if we're going to have these conversations every other day because our co-explorations aren't going so well, sure, at some point you are going to take an action, probably that's better for the organization, and indeed probably better if it's not a good fit for the person. But this is not about saying, this is not up to the standard we do here, and you better get it fixed. That really doesn't work very well. First of all, they don't know how to fix it. If they did, they wouldn't have sent it to you that way in the first place. So as a leader, our first responsibility is to help people develop to their very best potential. And if we can't do that, either because it's not working or the person isn't up to the skills, yeah, then we have to make decisions. It's not an opinion. This is about coming to agreement on the facts, if you will. You all are a little too young for Dragnet, but just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. That's what we want to talk about, and that's why it doesn't get personal. If you start analyzing the facts, it's not about, so when you did this, what you thought was going to happen, I'll give you an example out of one of our videos. So you sent out an email, and you expected them to get the work to you within 3 days. Yes. And did you check back to see if, in fact, they received the email a couple of days later? No, I didn't. So what you expected is they had received the email, but they were traveling. They never got the email. And as a result of that, they didn't get you the material that you needed. So you made an assumption, probably a good assumption, but it just didn't turn out to be true. So what's the truth of the situation? The truth is, we got to figure out, when I'm traveling, how do I get my emails? And how do I make sure that if I'm traveling, I can get the information you need within 3 days if that's what the project requires? So this isn't just an opinion, and again, we've talked about it not being a one-way lecture. I'm going to go through this quickly. Common pitfalls. You might think after having done this for 3 years at Blue Shield, we've got it all solved. These are our life lessons from this experience, and again, we've still got plenty of work to do. We do have what I would call partial implementation in the organization. Now, I would say almost all managers have been trained, but that does not mean that they do it and use it in their work every day. And they don't have to use it every day. But they need to use it where it applies. And I would say that we still have spots in the organization. Maybe in some places we are using it systematically and rigorously, in some places we're not. And it really only works ultimately to get the kind of performance out of the organization where it's a universal cultural phenomenon, and we're still working on that. Skipping steps. Gee, this takes too long. I'm not going to ask them to send me an email. How sophomoric is that? And I understand that. I've got executive vice presidents. Could you please send me an email? But you know what? It's amazing how doing that once or twice really lightens up the workload on you as a leader to actually be much clearer. Because you understand when you're not clear after you've seen in writing what people have heard rather than what you believe you've said. Once is enough. Again, I've had this conversation. If they don't get it now, tough. I haven't got time. These people are well paid. They're supposed to know their jobs. I haven't got time to spend time with them. A lot of you are students, faculty, and you're on different ends of your learning curve and your experience curve. But I guarantee you, if people had said, if Bodaken can't get it once, tough, I wouldn't be here today. It was only because I had mentors that took the time with me to say, it looks like you got some raw talent. Let's see if we can sit down and talk about this so we can get, And that was the only way. I loved learning. I wanted to learn. But I didn't know much about the healthcare industry when I came into it. And so as much as I could read or as much as I could absorb sitting and listening in meetings, there had to be some kind of personal approach. And I was lucky to have great mentors. It's all about them. One of the things I'll tell you right now, Peter Senge talks about almost the dangers of using this technique. One of the things you'll find is that a lot of this isn't about them, it's about us. We haven't been as clear. So when that piece of work comes across our desk and doesn't meet the standard, guess what? It's a two-way street. I haven't been clear about my expectations. So if I'm going to lead well, I've got to be sure that I'm as clear and that the things that I'm being, when there is that gap between expectation and reality, that expectation has to be crystal clear if we're going to change that. And that's often me, not them. Also, this is not everything. My old boss, I don't know where this came from, but I loved it. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. This is not the only thing one does to create great management. Okay? It's not like if I do the managerial moment of truth, then I'm a level 5 leader. It's not the case, but it is a very important step. It is a very important piece, and I would encourage people to take it, use it, to think about it, but mostly just buy the book. So, rules of thumb, do it quickly. Now, when I say do it quickly, when it's 2 a.m. and the project is due at 8 a.m., and people are wrung out and they've had their last cup of coffee, probably bringing the team together to have a collective moment of truth is probably not such a good idea. So if things haven't gone the way you'd like them to go and you see a gap between expectation and reality, that's probably not the time to do it. But 3 weeks later is not the time to do it either. So be timely. This is important. And it's the thing that, how often with managers have you had the experience or seen the experience? We call it too little, too much, too little. And it's simply this. It comes across my desk and I don't say anything. Okay, but he or she's working hard. Comes across my desk and I don't say anything. Okay, comes across my desk and I don't say anything, and here it is again. What the hell are you doing? You know, too little, too much now. What do you mean, what am I doing? I sent that same report to you 3 times. You never said a word. And then you say, guess what happens then? Rather than saying, you're right, let's sit down and walk through it, because you're busy, because you don't have time, what we do is, you're right, I apologize. I'm sorry, I should have never raised my voice. You're right, you're right, you're right, and we walk out of the room. Because leaders don't like conflict any more than people that are following them. So I get off the stage if I can. Too little, too much, too little. That's not how we create great leaders. It's certainly not how we execute great leadership. Make managerial moment of truth. This is a formula of sorts. I would encourage you, if you're going to use this, to go through the 4 steps formally, but make it your own. We are different. The way we approach this, the way we have conversations. That does not mean that you can obfuscate and you can skip over getting to the hard truth. But the way you do it will be, in part, your unique style of leadership, and that can be very different and still very successful. What do we hope for, Robert and I? Well, of course, we hope, particularly for the Blue Shield organization, extraordinary performance, and I think we sometimes get that and sometimes we don't. And so we will keep working as an organization to do that more and more and more, and I don't think that journey really ever ends. We want to unleash learning in our organization selfishly because we know that's where performance gets self-corrective and anticipates the market rather than follows it, which is where we want to be. And of course, for anyone who is in a role like mine or in a role like many of the people in this room, there is nothing more exciting, there's nothing more gratifying than seeing people that you might have thought as a C player coming to an A level of performance. In part because of the way you've helped them develop. It is one of the most gratifying things. In some respects, it's one of the most important things any manager or leader will do. Certainly, going through this process, there's no guarantee of success. But what I will guarantee is that this process improves the probability significantly if it's used well. So, about the truth, I saw this quote and I thought it was just perfect for us because it's what we really believe. That all truth is an achievement. If you would have truth at its full value, go win it. And I'll leave you with a quote from the book. This is a teaser so that during the book signing you can't help yourself, but go read the first 165 pages before this. But this is, Robert and I worked hard together. It's the first time I'd written a book. Robert's written several. But we're proud of every paragraph. We're particularly proud of this one. As we have emphasized, the result we want is not simply corrections to behavior, but rather the full manifestation of the people's potential. We want that for ourselves as well. While the MMOT is often led by one person for another or for a team, it is a mutual moment of truth and learning for everyone. Some of what is learned is obvious, such as performance patterns, process design, execution, planning, and managing. But some of the lessons learned are harder to list with such tangible clarity. There are human questions to consider, such as, how can we bring out the best in each other? How can we reach beyond our usual range? How can we be better at what we do, at how we manage, at how we learn, at how we work together, at how we co-create with each other? How can we, together, build a great organization? For those of you who are part of organizations or are going to create your own organizations over time, I hope in some small way that this technique will help you. It's certainly something that we believe at Blue Shield has made a difference. And with that, thank you very much. Be happy to take some questions.
When we get your statistics of Blue Shield, notice that the organization grew something like 15% compounded growth rate for 5 years.
Right.
Had you chosen 16% compounded growth rate, that might have been an impossible, not an unreasonable goal.
Yeah.
So how does a leader distinguish between the unreasonable and the impossible?
I don't know is the answer. Again, my old boss says, you don't know that you've gone too far till you've gone too far. And my own view is that you have to reach for the stars. And sometimes that means almost by definition that you will fail to get a few in your grasp. And we have reached too far at times. We've set goals for ourselves that in retrospect were impossible. And what was interesting about that process and why this has really helped me as a leader, anything that you teach and write is probably the best way to learn it, as that if I look back and why did I believe that goal was at all achievable, it was because I didn't understand the reality of the organization. I was asking the organization to do what was technically impossible without looking at the talent, the technology, the gaps in those places. And I was asking this organization, regardless of how talented the people were, to do things that just weren't in the cards at that moment of development. And so I think that the best place to start is where are we, but not get trapped by that, because otherwise we'll set goals that are eminently achievable but are not going to be the kinds of goals that great organizations set for themselves and we aspire to. So it is a fine line. My guess is that if you're setting unreasonable goals, you're only going to hit them 80% of the time. We call it setting unreasonable goals and expecting to achieve them. And we mean every word of that, expecting to achieve them. That is not to say that we expect to achieve them 100% of the time. But that expectancy, and again, we've all seen it, right? I mean, how many times have we said, I didn't think we could get there. How do we do that? And the thing with that is bottle that. What did we do? Again, go back and analyze, how did we do that? That's the overperformance managerial moment of truth, where we hit it out of the park. We had a manager who hit 350% of their sales goal last year. And the manager's manager said to her, how'd you do that? And she said, I really don't know. And she said, well, you got to know, because we want to get this down and we want to understand how we translate this into everyone else's behavior. So, the correct answer is I'm not sure, but I do know organizations that are the kind of organizations that lead instead of follow, are the ones that set, if not unreasonable goals that are aggressive beyond which I can write a strict business plan to achieve. Because they're just one step further, and it's the creativity and the imagination, and frankly a lot of hard work that people fill the gap with.
Hello. I was wondering when your son, your 16-year-old, said that he speaks because you do, I'm wondering what kind of answer you gave him.
Well, I think I gave him the answer that most parents give. What's that have to do with anything? What we did, we started talking about the different situations that we were in. That is, he was right. He's seen me speed. He probably has seen me go that fast too. Right. But our life situations are different. And his risks are very different than mine. And the good thing about him, in spite of the fact that he is not risk averse, is that he's pretty commonsensical, and he can understand something like that, which is my risks, and I don't just mean human, getting into a car accident and hurting yourself or someone else, but the fact that one of the things that your independence is tied to is having a driver's license, and now that's gone. So based on you taking a certain risk, the consequences are the things you're going to have to bear. That doesn't make it right for me to speed and wrong for him to do it, but it does say, am I willing to pay the consequences for the same reality but different life situations? So I don't think that convinced him. Really, I think at that age, if I recall. I don't think I was very teachable either. But he does understand, he certainly understands now, that this is going to cost him a lot. So for 30 seconds of whatever that exhilaration was, it's going to cost him a lot.
Going back to setting unreasonable goals,
Yes.
I think, by definition that you're not going to get all of them. So
Right.
what's the way of doing damage control to inspire your team to go after the next unreasonable goal after one may not have happened?
Well, I think the way you do it is pointing out the ones that we've achieved. So if you never achieved any of them, then there's something wrong with the formula. But let's say you're hitting 75% of them. Then what you want to do is make sure people realize, A, we did hit 75%, and if we'd sat down in a room and carefully analyzed it, we wouldn't have set a single one of those goals. We'd have brought it down a notch. But we achieved it. Sometimes we've even overachieved our unreasonable goals. Now the 25% we didn't, and again, coming back to this as a way of thinking about what's the next step is analyzing the 75%, as importantly analyzing the 25%. How was it that even though there were gaps in our learning, gaps in our understanding, gaps in our talent, gaps in our technology, gaps in our market share, whatever it was, that we got to 75% of those goals? There are reasons. It's not a mystery. But it takes time, and it's time often we don't spend as an organization to really understand how we got there. Once we understand it, we can replicate it more often than not. And likewise, the 25% that we didn't get to, my guess is we'll come back and say we didn't understand the nature of the gap. So this is not about wishful thinking. In the end, this is about real analysis and then trying to figure out how far can we take, because there's always a gap between what real analysis will get you and, again, imagination creation and, in my experience, a tremendous amount of hard work.
Well, I share your passion with regard to truth because you can't do much about anything unless you understand the truth. But I also know that it gets confused in that I know my own husband's told me on occasion, he says, people don't always want you to share the truth about what you think. And it is a problem, and I think there's, I see it, and I think all of us do, is that being confrontational and addressing the truth is sometimes viewed as a negative,
Right.
and not being nice.
Right.
And yet it's the only way you can really get to something and solve it. And you particularly see it when things go from a molehill to a mountain.
Yeah.
Because nobody would confront the truth. And that takes a huge amount of energy and time from everybody. And so that's one I use a lot, is that let's get to the molehill first and solve it there instead of waiting until it gets to be the mountain and we're all tied up in it.
Well, and what that is, again, that's the too little, too much, too little. It's if we took it on when it was a small thing, it really wouldn't be a confrontation at all. And these, again, if this is part of the art, and I'm certainly not an artist every time I do this personally. But part of the art of this is to try to make it about the managerial moment of truth. We use code now. We say, let's have a managerial moment of truth. Now immediately what happens, since people understand the technique, is, oh, okay, this is about learning. It's not, but we did have, for a period of time, through our first training, people used it in the other way, almost as a rep. We're going to have a managerial moment of truth now, sit down. But when we went back through, Robert and I, after the book was published, we made a big deal about this, which is use it as a code word to take the pressure off. Because now we moved from blaming to learning. And that's what we're doing. Now, that isn't to say my expectations of your performance is going to go down. No, it's going to be at or above where it was. But let's work on what didn't work right or what really worked right so that we can capture that. And so sometimes just, Robert's even suggested, I don't know how many of our people, actually, throw the book on the table, put it up on a board and say, let's just go through the steps together. That takes a lot of the defensiveness out of the situation. And say, we're on this step now, let's see if we can get to the truth together. Okay? Let's see if we can get to reality together. How the heck did that happen? Let's just go through it in detail. And what would we do differently? And could you send me a note on that? That's all it is. As simple as it sounds, it's bloody hard.
Well, I encourage the people I work with me to tell me the truth when I have a bad idea, and their code word, code sentence is, you know, you might want to rethink that.
Yeah. Well, those are good. Those are good. And you know, if the emperor has no clothes, then nobody else is going to do it. I'm perfectly comfortable walking through this on this side. I've got to be comfortable when it's coming my way. And I would say there's always issues in that. In any hierarchy, that's a difficult problem for anybody to say, you know, Bruce, you're wrong. You're just wrong. But now if they say that, it's not like, what do you mean I'm wrong? It's, well, let's figure that out. And now we have a way to go through it together without me getting defensive and without them feeling like I can't say that to anybody in the organization. In fact, our managers were really excited when this first came out. Oh, great, now I have a way to talk to my boss. Which is true. But what you'll find is that your peers and the people that report to you are probably most of the time what you'll use it. But certainly, it's a great way to change the atmosphere in trying to give feedback to anyone in any organization, and for it to still remain positive in a learning situation.
In your example of the blue and green,
Yes.
what if one person's colorblind? So
Yeah.
is there times when you don't come to
Yeah.
agreement, and what do you do?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually, because we use very simple examples in the book. We use usually simple examples, but there are shades of gray. And what tends to happen, I think, in shades of gray is when what we call your mental model is different than my mental model. And if we can't break through that, that's a real challenge. Because it really is, mental models in terms of how we work through the organization can be very different, but they have to be aligned for us to work together and achieve common goals. And so if our mental models are so different that I really can't see what you're seeing, you know, over some period of time, there's going to have to be some kind of disconnect. And that can be either way. So I would say keep working, but if it doesn't work, it's probably not a good fit. And that doesn't mean that that person is not a valuable person. It just, in what we're trying to achieve, your mental model, well, think about it. If everybody in a large corporation was a free-spirited entrepreneur, that's their mental model. That works great when there's 3 of you building a company. But if you've got 4,500 people acting that way, trying to get to common goals is impossible. So it's that kind of thing where you've got to, it depends on the situation. Thank you.